Hey guys, this is one of those promised videos that is a super simple, I'm not even going to call it a recipe video because it's not. It is a how-to in the kitchen. Today we are browning hamburger. It is something that may seem fairly simple to a lot of people. However, if you have never been taught how to do it, you may not know how to, because a lot of recipes, recipe videos, any of that kind of stuff, and even I am guilty of this, when I say brown the hamburger and add it, I do exactly that, and I don't show that process. So today, that is exactly what we're doing. Now, what I'm starting with, if you've watched any of my grocery haul videos, when we happen to buy our hamburger, we buy it in 10-pound bulk tubes. That is because there are 12 of us here at this point in time, and we need that. We need more. You can buy it from your local grocery store, supermarket, butcher, wherever you are at, whatever works for you. Usually in 1-pound increments. Sometimes you can buy it in more. Now, if you've got fresh ground beef, that is great. I'm going to run through how to do that too, though I do not have any thawed to show you guys. What I have is roughly about 2 to 2.5 pounds of frozen hamburger, because when we do that tube, we divvy it up, we put it in freezer bags, and we throw it in the freezer because it keeps that way for quite a while. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to throw this in the pan, and I'm going to show you guys. Now, what I am using, a couple tools. First of all, you need a pan. You should have a lid that fits it, a pan large enough to fit whatever hamburger you're using. And then I have got my meat chopper and a fork. You do not have to have one of those handy meat choppers like I have. It just is really convenient. Honestly, 2 forks will get the job done. You can also use a fork and a wooden spoon. You just want to make sure that whatever you're using does not melt in the pan, and that it is going to help you chop up or break apart the meat as it's cooking. If your hamburger is thawed, you're gonna skip all of the beginning steps I'm gonna show you as it's frozen. And again, I'm gonna show you that here in just a second in the pan. Okay guys, I have dropped my frozen hamburger into the pan. I have not turned on the stove yet, because first thing I wanna show you guys, if you are working with fresh hamburger instead of frozen, you're going to use whatever tools you're working with. Again, I've got my chopper here, and you are going to break apart your meat. If you're using 2 forks, do that. If it's thawed, break it up as much as you can before it starts cooking. It's really going to help you out in the long run. If it's frozen though, like mine is, you're not going to be able to do anything until it starts cooking. Now guys, I'm also going to apologize for the lighting. It is, well, it's winter here, and it gets dark early, and I did not get this done early enough in the day to show you guys. So, that's my apology. Now, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start my flame here, because I cook on gas. I am going to turn this down to about a 3 or 4. So, I have my flame on. Now, if you're working with fresh, I would still, if you're working on a gas stove, even on electric, right about a 3 is always my favorite. It's just a nice even amount of heat, not too high, not too low. So this being frozen, I am going to go ahead. You're going to want to put the lid on it to trap that heat inside, because what that's going to do is it's going to start to thaw the meat that's on the top while starting to cook the bottom layer. So I'm going to let this sit for a couple minutes. Keep a really close eye on it, guys. As soon as you start to see some juices coming out around the edges and starting to brown just a tiny bit, that's when we move on to the next step. Okay guys, I'm going to lean this in here. See how those juices have come out and it's starting to brown ever so slightly at the edges? That is exactly what we want to do this next little bit. I'm going to take the lid off. You're going to get some condensation inside the lid, so don't immediately move it over, because you want to drip that back into the pan to avoid some messes. Now, I have my 2 tools. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to use my plastic fork. Now, this is not something that everybody has. It's just something I've had for a very long time. And this works great to kind of scrape off some of these edges that have already started to thaw a little bit. They're not cooked yet, they're just thawing. So this meat can come off, and this will now start to cook in the bottom of the pan as well. It just saves a little bit of time and gets it done faster, but as you can see, the center section is not thawed enough for that. I'm going to scrape off the raw bits, use both tools to flip it. Now check that out. That is how browned this is. Now I can do this one of 2 ways. If you're using 2 forks, you just start chipping away at the edge. You don't want to get too big of pieces. Otherwise, you're gonna have to break those apart too. So like this one that came off right here that was a little bit bigger, I'd have to break that off. Now, if you happen to have a meat chopper, you can put it on here and just start twisting. This is going to break up some of those meat pieces that are cooked, and then we're gonna put it in the bottom of the pan and continue to chop and twist. Now, I do tend to go back and forth between the two. My chopper more so gets used, I have personally found that it works easier for me when I'm more in the second half of cooking this. I like to use the fork to break things up. A couple of my teenagers fully prefer this, as does my husband. So I am going to keep scraping away at this. Again, I use it to scrape this off if I don't use the edge of the pan. And while you're doing this, that underside is continuing to cook and get ready for the next flip. So we are going to go ahead. I've got some decent chunks in here, so I'm going to chop those up just a little bit. And then I'll put the lid back on and let it sit for a couple more minutes until I see, you're going to start to see, you'll notice this thawing a little bit more if you're doing this from frozen. So guys, as I'm sitting here watching this, I want to get zoomed in just a little bit. See if you guys can see here. You can see on the edges how it's starting to brown just a little bit. And what's on top, you can see it kind of glistening a little bit more, which means it's thawing. Since this is ready, I'm going to go ahead. See, you can see it scraping more this time. You can see how much brighter red it is underneath. It starts to get that almost whitish look as it's thawing and cooking. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm using my turner or my chopper to kind of brace the meat so it's not sliding around in the pan as I'm doing this. That's something, if you're using 2 forks, you can just as easily do, or whatever utensils you're using, use one to brace it and one to scrape it. All right, guys, I want to point out what is starting to happen here. I've got more meat cooking, and there are juices or oil or grease, however you want to look at it, forming in the bottom of the pan. That is the fat as it renders out of the meat, and that is a good thing. That is part of the flavor and all of that. So, because this meat is starting to cook down more and we've got a good chunk of it done, the whole thing is getting soft. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this and show you guys what we can do. See how floppy that is? Now, this is when I go ahead, and it's a great time to use that chopper to break up the remainder of this meat. And we're going to twist and mix with the meat that's around the edges to incorporate what is a little more cooked along with what is a little less cooked, because we want everything to be as even as possible. Otherwise, you could end up with a couple pieces that are really tough or dried out a bit, versus some that could be on the verge of being undercooked. So it's important to get all of that stuff from the edges, mix it all together, and now we're going to go ahead and we're going to cover it again. The goal at this point, now that we have gotten it down to a point where it's no longer frozen, the goal is to get rid of all of the pink in there. And as soon as that's done, we'll move on to the very last step, and you'll be done browning hamburger. Guys, do you see the beautifulness that is in this pan? Look at all that steam escape. That is one thing, guys, I forgot to warn you. When you go to pull your lid off, you do need to tilt to the side. Don't hold your arm over it, or you're going to end up with steam burns on your arm, because that steam can get mighty hot. So I'm going to go ahead one more time. I'm going to grab my chopper. You need to come through, chop all of this one more time. Make sure you get any large chunks that are still remaining, both to break them up, but also to make sure that you don't have any raw meat still in the center of any of those large chunks. And as soon as we have that done, and it's looking like I am good here, we are going to go ahead and turn off our heat and get ready to drain the grease off of this. Now guys, I highly recommend having some good pot holders to do this with, because you are going to be touching the pan a little bit. It's just going to be easier that way, and you want to keep your hands protected. Now I have ones I can slip my hands into. If you have good enough grip, you can just hold it with solid ones, which is fine as well. We're gonna use our lid kind of to keep the meat in here. Now, if you need to, you can actually use a colander over like a glass bowl or something like that. Do not pour it straight into your sink. You're not gonna do well for your drains that way. Now, I have a ceramic or stoneware cup here that we pour grease into and dump every couple of days. Because guys, if you let it sit any longer, it is gonna smell. And there are some people like my grandmother who would keep this fat and use it for other things, but that is not my style. Okay guys, so I've got this gap along my lid. I had to switch angles because it turns out I was completely blocking the light. I've got my cup sitting here to pour the grease into. I'm gonna grab both sides, keeping that crack in the lid. I'm gonna tilt this and pour that grease out. This is why, if you're not used to doing this, using a colander might work easier the first few times, but also chances are you're not going to be making quite as much as I do. So a smaller pan is easier to handle, a little bit lighter overall between the pan and the meat. So you're just going to want to keep draining until you're down to just the occasional drip drip. Okay guys, it is down to dripping now. It is a quick drip, but it's just dripping, so I'm going to give it a tiny little shake. Do that too much, guys, you're going to lose your grip on your lid and you're going to spill everything. That is learned from experience. And guys, I need to say thank you to one of my teenagers who came over and held the camera for that little bit. She did say that my tripod gave out for a second. So if it jolted there, we're sorry about that. Anyhow, this hamburger is officially browned. Guys, the reason I'm teaching you how to do this is because you can add browned hamburger to so many dishes, even those that don't call for it. Yes, you can do boxed meals like Hamburger Helper and stuff, and this can be used for that. But there are so many things you can add hamburger to, either to do a little bit more for it or to just change things up. You can use whatever amount suits you. If you're cooking for yourself, you can use half a pound of hamburger, and if it's still too much, you can put some of the brown hamburger in the fridge. Or in general, if you want to cook up a full pound and it's too much, put some of the cooked hamburger in the fridge and save for another meal tomorrow or something like that. You can add this to any sort of noodles with pasta. Guys, that's how you make a meat sauce. You can add it to ramen. The possibilities are pretty limitless. Obviously, there's gonna be a couple things that may not taste quite right, but that is really the extent of it. This is going to work for so many different things. I am going to say you may find some people after draining the grease who also rinse their hamburger. I do not agree with that policy. I feel like you wash any potential flavor out of your meat when you do that. Not to mention, it's a hassle. And that water can actually affect other dishes as well. So if you're adding it to pasta, instead of having a little bit of grease clinging to the meat, you're going to have water, and that could water down your sauce and stuff. I'd rather have that little bit of flavor. We do choose to drain the grease out because otherwise it tends to separate in a lot of meals. And that is just not something we like because that grease always separates to the top and it's really difficult to skim off. It's just easier to drain it up front. But if you want to, you could leave it in. So I hope you guys got a lot of great information here, as well as some ideas of what you can add this hamburger to, and that it helps you with your future cooking adventures. If this video helped you out, I would love to hear that in the comment section down below. I read those comments every time I get a chance, and when I get notified that one has come through. In the meantime, I hope that you're having a blessed day. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss everything else coming up next. And I'll see you in the next one.